All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the first episode of the Healthcare Innovation podcast. Today, as our first guest, we have Giuliana Kotikela, one of my good friends from Deloitte. Now she runs a startup called as ChiKeey. She's been involved in innovation in healthcare and even otherwise for last 10 plus years. And I thought, who better than her for our first episode? So Jules, if you wouldn't mind, if you can start with your introduction first, and then there are a number of topics that I want to discuss with you.
Sure. Thanks, Paurav. Hi, everybody. My name is Giuliana Kotikela. I'm the co-founder and CEO of ChiKeey. And ChiKeey is actually an emotional management system. So when you think about smart wearables, we analyze how you feel, your emotional state at any given point in time in real time.
Great. Jules, now we'll talk a little bit more about ChiKeey, but I wanted to go back in time and wanted to hear about your first experience when you started driving innovation within Deloitte. You ran an innovation studio. Can you tell us a little bit about that and uh, like what kind of innovation were you driving? And also I'm very keen to talk about how, right? Because in large enterprises, innovation has always been a challenge. And you were one of the few individuals who was able to successfully drive it. So how did you manage it?
So within Deloitte, for the strategy, the overarching strategy for the firm, services was how they really generated their revenue. And they wanted to start moving away from 100% of services into to hedge that bet into 80% services and 20% products and solutions. And when you think about a large organization like Deloitte, there's a lot of assets, a lot of such that could be reused. I know everybody always thinks they're, just nobody else's business is the same as theirs. However, there's a lot of similarity across even industry, right? When you think about, how do you organize or how do you identify or increase your profitability or your revenue or your margins, there's pretty much three different types of ways that you can kind of do some of these things. So with these similarities, there's the opportunity to reuse some of these assets that have been created like best in class for other customers or clients and have them essentially like white labeled. So as we started moving into the whole products realm, how do we do this bigger, faster, and more effectively? We created what was the Insight Studio. And the Insight Studio really served to not only just cultivate the talent, right, to achieve a higher rate per hour, but also to build out those assets and to reuse them and basically deploy them to other client situations.
That's interesting. So the way I read it is Deloitte had kind of virtually solved so many problems so many times. Some of the things could be converted into assets so that you don't reinvent the wheel every single time.
Exactly.
However, that could be challenging, right? Because each individual, each client also, in general, believes their problem is truly unique. So how were you able to kind of push these one size fits all solutions with your clients? What were the challenges that you faced when pushing some of these innovative solutions?
Well, it's not a one size fits all, right? So, an asset won't get you 100% of the way there, almost guaranteed it won't. But it will get you 60%, 70%, right? Everybody's different business, processes and challenges within that, that's all unique to them. So there is definite modifications as well as what's their business objectives in the short term and the longer term. And then how do we kind of, reassess what we have to be best of breed for them, right? When you think about an asset, not all companies are at the same maturity level. And so it's difficult to run if you can't walk. So how do you take some of those things and maybe break them down into more bite-sized chunks to ensure that you have the impact, but also the client receives the value, right? So there's not that reinventing of the wheel per se, but it might not be, super speed like marathon running.
Understood. But no, I found one thing very interesting there. So You talked about assets or products, right? And essentially, it was services converted into assets or products. That in itself is a huge mindset shift for somebody who's not been in the product world. So,
Yes.
how difficult or easy was it to bring that mindset change?
That mindset change was actually probably the hardest thing to do. Selling a product, an actual tangible product, is very different than selling, let's say, a fixed fee or a rate per hour to a client. It's not the same revenue model. It's not the same business model. Also, the sales cycle is about 2 years from tip to tail, from the starting, like, introduction to the client to the actual sale. So if there's no revenue generation or revenue coming in from that asset, how do you realize that there's been, movement or momentum in that effort, in that sales cycle, which is 2 years in duration? So when you think about it, the rates per hour and all of that is pretty quickly done, right? 8 weeks in arrears,
Yeah.
like it's pretty straightforward. So the mind shift for the partners or the, different individuals that were selling the engagement, the work, it was really challenging for them to kind of get that mindset. And also, how does this benefit them?
So I want to stay with that thing a little bit more, because when all of us read about innovation, right, we talk about unmet needs, we talk about product market fit, versus what I'm hearing from you is the challenge was not all those. The challenge was aligning to internal business model, aligning to what people were comfortable doing, because the size of the company is so huge that the change in direction is more internal driven as opposed to external driven.
Completely. Completely. I mean, from a larger strategic view, you definitely have kind of the guidance and where you're going. The good thing about the studios allowed us to, make these fast, quick changes, these different types of business models, et cetera, and to see how they really worked and what worked well, what didn't work, to make tweaks before we could actually roll them out to the larger engagement.
I see. So that way you were able to at least demonstrate success or fail
Absolutely.
fast and get things
Exactly,
adopted.
which
Got
is
it.
a key tenet.
So now with that experience from Deloitte in mind, now you've been running your own company for a while. How is it different? Like, how is driving innovation different as opposed to driving it in a large company like Deloitte?
Um, there's some nuanced differences, right? I mean, you still have to deal with what is the business problem that you're trying to solve, right? You go back to what's the problem that you're trying to address, who's the buyer, and what are the different touch points and how are you addressing those? So that is, still pretty much the same. It's just now the difference is, having a hardware and a software product is night and day different from a platform play, a software solution, um, or any type of rate per hour. Right, the business model is very drastically different when you have to deal with supply chain and manufacturing nuances that were not there before.
I see. So for our listeners, if you can elaborate a little bit, right? When you say hardware play is different than software, because a lot of us, just by the sheer magnitude of numbers, come from the software side of things, from the process side of things. How is hardware different? Where all are the key differences? If you can give some examples, maybe.
So you've got, electrical engineers, you've got not just industrial design engineers, you have, hardware engineers, all of these different types of people, these different groups together, all the different circuitry. So for our consumer product, right, it's a smart wearable, and there's 94 different components on our PCB Flex, which is the
Wow.
actual internal board. And the size is 17, 17 millimeters total in length. So this is a very small piece, double-sided, and in a ring form factor. The challenge is, when something goes wrong, because of so many sensors that are included, it's not just one sensor, there's 5 different sensors. You have to understand where the actual root cause of the problem is occurring. So it's not just one and done. You have to go through the full end-to-end testing of everything, the full integration testing from start to finish, which is night and day different from software. Software, you can design it, develop it in your garage in 3 days and push it out. With hardware, it's just it's not possible, right? Not at that scale. It takes definitely weeks and months and even years sometimes to, I mean, think about the generation of just like iPhones, iPods, right? Like, how did that start? How big was it? It was like the size of a computer, definitely like a large tablet. And to make those things smaller and the minimization process is very challenging. And I think that's where I think there's a lot of underestimation of if you've never done anything with an actual tangible like hardware product, people don't understand that. They don't have any concept like, oh, okay, I can do this in a month or 3 months, and there's also cost associated with it. With software, it's much leaner, right, to design and develop that. With hardware, you have so many different roles and so many different users like to test and to design, develop, and create that. It's just a whole ball of wax different.
I see. I see. So that's very interesting. The number of parts and number of stakeholders you mentioned. If and yet, I think hardware is also one of the very important areas for innovation because only software can't get you beyond certain things. You need a better hardware, a better uh, it enables better utility, better adoption of any new idea. Like if you were to tell people like who are interested in hardware innovation, especially in healthcare, given healthcare is more complex when it comes to hardware, what are some of the key lessons? What are some of the key precautions that someone has to keep in mind?
So regulatory and risk considerations, right? That can push you back a good year easily. And you think about compliance, like if it's a med tech device for FDA, any type of class 1, 2, 3 device, you have to make sure that you're in GXP compliance. So there's a lot of stuff that if you haven't done that already or you're not doing that currently, to go back, you can be heavily fined or face consequences from regulatory instruments. So there's definitely some challenges with that. You also want to make sure that when you're designing and developing, there are different quality standards, which alludes to the GXP. And if you don't have those already in place, to change or restructure your whole supply chain to ensure that they have the proper certifications needed could not only just be costly, because small batches are extremely costly to run, right? You can't just choose another manufacturer really simply and say, okay, I'm going to go with this person over here and they're going to be half the cost. It doesn't work that way with cleared devices, medical cleared devices. My biggest gotcha or recommendation for anybody going into this area would be to definitely have those right people on board in terms of from a risk or regulatory standpoint early and often, and then also potentially an innovation or accelerator or partnership, strategic partnership with some of the big pharma or tech companies would be ideal to help navigation where they have some stake in the game, right? Because you're going to need that type of exposure. So something like, who else is building, the med tech devices today, either Medtronic, you think about some of these different things, or even Johnson & Johnson, you can even say Procter & Gamble, P&G. There's some different players out there that offer different accelerator programs. And I think it would behoove the person to definitely sync up with them.
I see. Got it. Makes sense. Fair enough. Jules, another thing I personally strongly believe in is for anybody who wants to innovate and also run their own business, persistence is the key. You have to hang in there. It's a game of time. I heard you say that as well. How do you motivate yourself? What keeps you going and persist on the problem statement for such a long time?
You have to have some small tangible wins. Small wins will help you keep moving when things are very bleak, dreary, and tough. And also, when you start seeing your product come to life, I have to say, when I got my first ring, I was in New York, and I was giving a presentation and a speech, and the package came in, and I opened it and I cried. I literally cried. I sat there with an investor and I cried, and he's like, I said, you don't understand like what we've gone through to get to this day, to actually feel it in my hands, to sit here like with you now. I was just overcome. And even though the software that I've designed and developed before has been wonderful, and I've seen people leaps and strides and what they're able to do and the impact, it was nothing compared to that moment. Nothing. Right? To have something that you birthed from conception, like from nothing to something tangible in the world, and to see people actually able out there to use it is huge. But that's a long journey. And so I think you need to step back into what are the small wins that can help not only just keep yourself, but the team motivated, right? Those quick wins that can illustrate and triangulate not only what's possible, but the value that you're bringing.
I see. No, that makes a lot of sense. I think small wins are a key to survive in any longer marathon, I guess.
And people always think, it's always about the white space, but the white space, it doesn't have to be outer space. I think you have to, what are the small chunks that you can start working on and seeing those results quickly that can keep everyone together, right? It's hard to stay together when you start losing that momentum.
Got it. Jules, that was quite insightful to hear your innovation story. Any parting thoughts or words for our listeners, especially who want to play in the healthcare innovation space on the combination of software and hardware?
I think if anybody, needs any help with any of that, please reach out. Let me know. I'd be happy to connect anybody if I could. And in addition, I would love to just impart with our, any of the listeners that, medtech needs more innovation. And I think the only way that we're going to get there is by people taking the time to start investing more with medical devices, right? Early and often, like smaller startups that have the ability to do something much more dynamic.
Got it. Well, Jules, thanks for taking the time. Really appreciate you sharing your story and the words of wisdom. Thanks so much. Bye.
Bye, guys.